Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for sitting through all the tech check and everything. And thanks so much for the extra effort for this very special blended event that we're attempting to do this time around. So I think we're going to start admitting everyone into the Zoom, right? Okay, super. Why don't we begin? Okay. Sorry for the wait, everybody. Hi. Hello, everyone. Can we go back to the title slide? So thank you everyone for joining us here today at the ICA at NYU Shanghai online. Today's event is the Roundtable with Ponds Among Ponds curators, artists, and scientists. We're really glad to have you here for this specially blended event. We are speaking to you here just with the scientists joining us here at the ICA gallery, while the artists and curators will be joining us from online. Please, before we get started, allow us to go over some basic guidelines for today's events. Oh, and my name is Michelle Hyun, by the way. I'm the director and curator at the ICA. For those of you who can or cannot understand me, this event is both in English and Chinese and will have simultaneous interpretation. To select the language you want to hear, please click on the glow button, which says interpretation on the bottom right corner of your Zoom window. And you can choose either English and Chinese, and you'll hear audio in this language. And you can also switch this at any time. So if you have not chosen your language at this point, please select that now. Okay. So for those of you that are less familiar with Zoom, we are conducting this event in the webinar format. So for the public participants, you'll only be able to listen and view only. If you have any questions for the artists, curators, or scientists, please use the Q&A window for those questions and comments. If you have any problems with Zoom or technical issues or about the event, please use the chat window to message the ICA staff. And as for the written questions, comments, please feel free to type in either Chinese or English, which will then be translated for the remainder of the group. And finally, for everyone here today, this event will be recorded, and the recording may eventually find its way onto the ICA website or our online media archive, and we'll begin recording now. So I'll try to make this very short as we have a lot of ground to cover, I think, today. The day before yesterday, the ICA just opened our spring 2021 season, which is the final season in our artistic research program, the Invisible Garden, with a guest curated exhibition and project called Ponds Among Ponds, an exhibition of threshold behavior and nested life. Our guest curators for this season are Anna-Sophie Springer and Etienne Turpin. And our artists, 5 international artists, there's the collective agency represented here today by Kobe Mathis, Anne Duki Jordan with Pauline Doutreluingne, Mao Chenyu, Maximilian Prüfer, and representing Zaanheh Project, the artist Monica Lynn. And you can read more of their detailed and very extensive bios on the ICA website by clicking on the event webpage in the chat provided in another window. However, since the artists will give self-introductions to their work, I'll just take a moment to introduce our scientists here today, and since they don't have individual names, introducing them. So first off, please allow me to introduce Dr. Dong Ning, who is a zoologist. Zooarchaeologist at Fudan University. Her research focuses on human-animal relationships in past societies through archaeology. Would you mind just waving hello, Dr. Dong? Okay. Our next scientist is Dr. Sascha Krause. He is a microbiologist at East China Normal University. His work has been dedicated to the study of biodiversity ecosystem function relationships through the application of multidisciplinary approaches in microbial model systems. Please wave hello, Dr. Krause. Next, we have Dr. Pan Yan. She is an archaeologist also at Fudan University, and her research focuses on the ancient relationship between humans and plants through archaeobotanic method, particularly the wetland region of the lower Yangtze River. Say hello, Dr. Pan. And last but certainly not least, I want to introduce Zhang Minhwa, who is already an old collaborator of the ICA. He was with us for a workshop almost 2 years ago with Zheng Bo in our first season. Dr. Zhang Minhwa, who is an ecologist at East China Normal University, and he studies plant pollinator relations, ecological networks, and the evolution of plant breeding systems. Please say hello, Dr. Zhang. Super. And for those, so why don't we just move right on? I just wanted to say thank you to all the artists and scientists and to Anna, Sophie, and Etienne for joining us here today for this unusual format. And just for the artist to note that we will have slides of the installation shots of your work as part of the presentation. If you prefer to just speak alone, do let us know. And otherwise, we'll have the photos of your work as part of your presentation available. Thank you so much.
Hi, everybody. My name is Anne-Sophie Springer, and I am one of the co-curators of Ponds Among Ponds. And here's Etienne Turpin, a wonderful collaborator and partner. It's really, really fantastic to see everybody on the screen here today. And I also want to welcome everybody who's joining as audience in our inaugural kickoff event for this exhibition. We have worked on the project for, I think, 2 years now in close conversation with Michelle in Shanghai. And unfortunately, for the entire time, we were not able to visit Shanghai or come to China. And so it's been absolutely beautiful for the past couple of days to see photos of the exhibition and see you sitting in the gallery right now. It's just really wonderful. It's an extraordinary situation of coming together here. And so I just want to welcome you all and thank you for being here. So I just gonna introduce our curatorial framework, Reassembling the Natural, for a moment, and then Etienne is going to give an introduction to the exhibition, Ponds Among Ponds. So Etienne and I have been working as a curatorial duo out of Berlin as Reassembling the Natural since 7 or 8 years now. And we organize exhibitions on the threshold of science, natural science, and multidisciplinary art relating to images of nature and the constructedness of an understanding of nature, primordially as it is narrated and taught in the framework of the Natural History Museum space. We've done a series of projects internationally, which the exhibition cycle started in Indonesia, actually, and then we did a series of exhibitions in zoological institutions in Germany. And now we are really pleased to conclude this exhibition work with Ponds Among Ponds at the ICA in Shanghai. We often take as a conceptual and curatorial starting point the work of biologists, evolutionary scientists, their writing, their field work, and then we have done a series of revisiting of historical sites. So, for example, the British naturalist and specimens collector Alfred Russel Wallace was very formative for the previous exhibition projects. And now with Ponds Among Ponds, we moved into a 20th century context via the writing and research and work of American microbiologist and evolutionary biologist Lynn Margulis. Exactly. So there's a curatorial research station about Margulis's work, forming a background to the curatorial setting of the art and artists that we've invited to work with us. And I look forward to hearing all of your statements about the works as part of this presentation. But can you want to take over?
Sure. So it was really a pleasure to get to meet Michelle, who got to see one of the last iterations of our exhibition cycle in Germany with Natural History Museum interventions. And her beginning a conversation with her about the invisible garden helped us really think about how throughout all of the work we had done about the Natural History Museum and presentations of nature, how the image of nature is produced in the Natural History Museum, still failed to address this element in the invisible garden, namely the subvisible world that makes up so much of what we think of and should think of as nature. And of course, one of the most important figures in the history of biology in the 20th century, who challenges us to think beyond competition towards questions of mutuality, cooperation, and symbiosis, is Lynn Margulis. And so in developing the exhibition with Michelle at the beginning, and then in conversation with all of these amazing artists who will speak to their own contributions in a moment, what we're able to do, I think, is to take the whole research question to a new phase, which is, even if the inheritance of the Natural History Museum, which we see as a colonial image of nature which has to be challenged, even in challenging that, we have to go beyond simply saying that we must think ecologically, and really strive to find a way to understand ourselves, each individual organism as an ecology unto itself within a field of other ecologies, or as the philosopher Tobias Ries says, ponds among ponds. And so we feel with both Michelle, Iris, the whole team at the ICA, and all of these fantastic contributions from each and every artist, that we are able to present the gallery itself as a pond, each work unto itself as a pond, or a process of inquiry into one way in which the human and non-human animals of a whole variety of scales are interacting with each other, and the ways in which we depend on each other. And especially thanks to Monica, we're also able to extend that pond into the whole Shanghai watershed as the exhibition continues outside. I won't say much more than that, but I do just want to add that we were just reading in The Guardian yesterday or the day before that the holobiont of our individual microorganism constitution was now posed as a model for rethinking the social holobiont, so-called, in the time of pandemic and lockdown, where in the same way that overuse of antibiotics can depress one's microbiome, the inability to be with one another and have a vibrant sociality in real life with affection and proximity and intimacy has affected our social biome tremendously. So even though many of us are still apart here in Europe, it is very warming to see the four of you sitting on a bench beside each other in a future that we hope we can all be a part of soon. So thank you everyone for being here, and I guess I will pass this along to the artists. I'm not sure if we have a particular order, but maybe we can start, if I may suggest, with Max at the top, and with that way we can kind of move through the gallery, as it were, as if we were there. So thank you all, and I pass it over to you, Max.
Hello. Should I explain my work now?
Yes, please, if you could give a little self-introduction and explanation, that'd be perfect.
Yeah, hi, my name is Maximilian, and over the past 9 years, I worked with different techniques that I developed, and I use these techniques to show very sensitive traces in nature. For example, I developed a representational technique called naturantopie, and it's a very sensitive coating on paper. And with this technique, I'm able to show, for example, the traces of ants. And so in this work, I have a total different situation, because the last years, the insects that I'm working with, or the animals that I'm working with, I try to put them together into philosophical models who represents human behavior too. And so in this situation, humans are more or less in the situation of imitating insects. So I didn't have any tool to visualize my thoughts, and so for that reason, I think I started to make this film. And in Germany, we lost over 70% of our insect population during the last 10 years. So, and in the German media, they often showed the example of regions in China where bees are extinct. And so I started to have this idea to see it with my own eyes, and then travel to China. And yeah, a lot of things changed in my mind. So I was really fascinated about the culture and nature of China. And so I had this idea to show the topic pollination, because I found out that a lot of people are familiar with insects are doing the pollination for their fruits, but it's not really aware in our mind that every fruit is a product of interaction. And yeah, when I found the farmers in that region that doing hand pollination, I was really fascinated, because it's they show us so clearly how the process is done, and they putting the feathers into pollen and then jumping from flower to flower. And when I've done the filming in the spring, I thought, okay, this would be very interesting to repeat a lot of perspectives to show the fruits after the pollination. So in the movie, you see sometimes the same tree in the spring and then in the fall again. to see which tree is pollinated and which tree is not pollinated. And sometimes you see a flower that gets pollinated in the spring, and then in the for the harvest you see the fruit picked. And so yeah, this is some. It's very hard to explain my feelings there, but yeah, if you have any questions, just ask.
Thank you very much, Max. Great.
You're welcome.
It's the first time that the work is being shown in China now, is that right?
Yeah, I was very surprised because my travel began in Shanghai, and I've never thought that this work is coming back to this point where I started. And yeah, it's I really miss China, and I miss my friends there. So because I traveled there over 2 months and learned so much about the philosophical or the philosophy, how they see nature, and how they're interacting with each other, and yeah, and
Great, thank you. We'll hear more about that from Mao Chenyu in a little while. Or no, why don't we go to Mao Chenyu right now as the next position to speak about? Mr. Mao, are you there?
好的，大家好，我是毛宇。就是我这次参加这个池塘中的池塘的作品呢，是2013年的一个电影，叫《拥有馨香》。我们的这个电影的名称非常的长啊，就是跟接下来5月份要放映的那个电影应该是一个连在一起的一个总体性的一个观看。然后我把这个电影的这个过程简单介绍一下。是2003年的时候开始来制作关于中国的水稻的产区的这些系列的纪录片。到2012年的时候，我做这个系列电影的这个名称叫稻电影，叫 Paddy Film。然后有了10年以后，我发现我们对中国乡村或者说对中国的整体的这个乡土的这个知识的这个概念出现了很多越来越热门的这种知识性的建构，还有在城市，特别在上海这样的城市，在北京这样的城市，我们出现了很多知识分子，包括所谓的文艺青年重新回到农村去的这样的一个类似于像新的乡村的或者说是下乡的运动。这个时候我发现我要重新理解这个农村，因为我是从农村长大的，20岁的时候再到达城市，然后在12年，大概是10年到电影10周年的时候，我就去湖南的老家，我自己的家，建了一个很小型的农场，大概是2公顷，30中国的叫30亩的样子，大概7户左右的人家的稻田，被我租赁来做了一种叫自然农耕的一种方法，就是拒绝任何的化学农药这样的一些所谓的化工的、化学的后制品的东西介入到这个稻田生态系统里面去。但是它并不是说要去研究如何在这样的状态之下去获得安全的食材。可能更重要的还是在于重新去思考在土地的产出和和这个乡村社会中间还有哪样的一种可以作为稳定的媒介。我们老是在认为是土地和农民中间有一种非常实质性的一种内在关系，但是12年以后，我自己种了1年的田，当然那个农场维持到今天为止，我发现也许我们对中国乡村的理解和对农村的理解还是有所偏差的，而且我们对这种从乡土中间所能生产的知识这一个单向性的一种方式，也许中间还有很多可以去再思考的地方。所以这个电影是在种了1年的田以后，第2年种田期间，我回到上海来做的一个比较 比较想做一个梳理。第一，1949年以后，新中国的关于农村的政策问题有一些解构，然后他也基于对中国农民的一些很区块的农民的调研和调查来做的一个这样的一个综述。大概这个电影是这个意思。然后第二个电影呢，就是叫《新乡的中国》。这个电影呢，可能就是跟共生这次的展览的这个主题，包括Lynn Margulis的这种阅读本身也给我很大的启发。就是我们可能要从早期的经济的这种逻辑，我自己电影的经济的逻辑里面转向一种生态逻辑来重新看待我们如何去重新去思考我们中国的乡土问题。然后5月份的时候，欢迎大家看了新片以后，我们也许可以聊一些有意思的东西。那部电影现在正在制作中，我觉得有很多话也不知道从哪里开始，但是刚刚的我们就是馈赠那部作品，我在现场看了以后，其实是我觉得有很多连接的地方，也是很值得很发人深省的。这也跟我现在在重新思考，就是叫越来越倾向于自发授粉的当代的经济中间那种正处于绝育的这种过程里面，我们重新思考乡土问题的时候，我们的视角也许就会发生一些变化了。就是这样，谢谢大家。
Thank you so much. And just so everyone who's listening, just to make sure you're aware, at the finissage for the exhibition at the end of May, you can sign up at the ICA website so that you can have a virtual ticket to see the Anti-Rural China, the new film that Mao Shu just mentioned. And if I could just ask one quick question, if you could just say a few words about From the Soil and the point of departure of the new film. I think there's a really important historical element that you're also working in a way as a kind of archaeology of cinema, archaeology of the rural. If you could just say a bit about where the film takes as its point of departure. And everyone in the audience, please make sure to write down to remind yourself at the end of this event to sign up so that you can see the premiere of the new film.
2003年的时候，我们当时在湖北的神农架林区出现了一个所谓的汉民族的创世神话史诗，那个史诗的名字叫《黑暗传》。当时可能还有一个中国2000年左右还有一个非常强烈的一个以西方为轴线的一个认识，就是认为我们的汉民族缺乏史诗，所以那个时候的发现就变成了一个契机，是湖北的神农架林区，正好在我的老家东洞云湖的对面，所以我是从神农架林区去重新理解，还是说从森林去重新理解所谓文明的起源的，以及关于我们这个如何宏大的叙述我们在这个大地上的那种装置框架。然后到04年、05年，我又去了贵州的黔东南地区和黔西北地区，主要是调查当地的与水稻相关的宗教信仰，就是我们现在读书的叫罗系，叫罗这个怎么翻？可以翻译一下。就是罗系戴着面具的那种神物，而这个工作呢，也跟我的家庭有关系。我的祖父是当地的一位大巫师，然后我父亲也是一位巫师，然后到我这边就绝齿了，就是我们不光是离开了土地，也跟土地的这种所谓的神性的关联在不断的在解离，所以我也是在各个地方的，主要在南方的3个省区，包括福建在内，做了一些关于乡村的10年左右的调研以后，回到湖南去做了这部电影。这个电影很受到一种关系，就是毛泽东在早年的新农村运动考察报告里面，应该是农民运动考察报告里面，就以这个报告为契机，他重新思考中国农民如何在一种新的组织 或者所谓的社会框架之下来重新构建它的身份性、它的土地政治的问题。所以这个电影我当时跟这个人谈的时候，认为它有很大的局限性，因为它非常强烈的具有一种戏谑的要去否定了我们已有的历史结构和历史架构的关系。但是新向的中国这部电影可能是对于费孝通的这个乡土中国和生育制度这样的概念本身，或者说我们对于越来越出现这种种业的变动，种业是一个修辞，就是种子的是一个修辞。我正好是明天要去广州影像3年展要展出的电影，就是关于种子的，就是种子的3个状态，是作为原生的种子、作为转基因的种子和作为地质的种子。人类在整体的面临这种生态的面临土地的时候，它种植的背后也是对那种越来越乡村中间那种父权的男权中心制的这种概念本身做了一种处理。但那个很就扯远了。但是我觉得又做了10年的农业以后，20年以来重新再去看待中国的乡土问题的时候，我也许发现共生也许是一个很好的视角。也就是说，从刚才我说的，从经济的逻辑，或者从这种礼物关系里面的经济的关系里面，如何回到一种更大的一种生态、一种馈赠，或者说如何去送出合适的语言，这也是模式的一个很好的一个早期的一个提示框架。好的，谢谢。
Thank you very much for this. Pauline and Duki, are you there? We would love to hear your thoughts about the installation now.
Hi.
Hello.
I'm Pauline.
I'm Duki. Hi, nice to meet you all. Yeah, Pauline and I, we work together as a collaboration. I'm an artist and Pauline is a curator, and our work comes together like very fluid, like a river. So it goes very like organic. So it's yeah, it's very nice to work with Pauline. So we are doing all this kind of visual research and then starting making stories about the installation which we did here for you guys. So it's the story of the nutmeg, but in a very non-linear form and migration. And we thought like, yeah, why not using a Chinese wedding bed? It actually it's like a frame. It's for me, the wedding bed symbolizes also like a ship which goes like through the ocean, but in a very like telling their own stories in a cosmos full of like narration. You want to say something?
Yeah, I think that what we try to do is also approach the story of the nutmeg like a spice that we all know and that we use a lot all over the globe, but that is intertwined with a lot of colonial history and other narrations, that we kind of wanted to reimagine the whole ecology around the nutmeg. So not only looking at it from a human perspective, but really imagine what is it to be a nutmeg? What is the environment, ecology around the nutmeg? So there's different animals that are also like dispersing seeds and taking care of migrations of the food we eat. So I think in our praxis, we look a lot of trying to create environments, ecologies that are experienceable, so that people can also like twist their own imagination about things we take for granted. And I think the story of the nutmeg is a very complex story with a lot of different protagonists, but we try to open up the imagination, our imagination at first, and therefore there's a video around 20 minutes where it goes from the the kind of the visual memory that is connected to the early colonial stories about why people went to search for the nutmeg in Indonesia, and then it goes over to botany of desire, reproduction of plants, and it goes into a crescendo of a craziness about taste and longing for taste. And it goes back, in fact, at the end where it started. So it's not a non-linear story. It's more like a roundabout where you also get lost and don't know anymore what you have seen and what you saw, or if you're smelling, or if you're seeing, or if you so like it's kind of an indulgent video piece. And then on the both sides there's drawings of fantastical tales where Duki as an artist drew the story from her perspective, and there's a lot of maybe elements that you might recognize or not, but it's also a different reimagination of the diasporic being of the nutmeg, and maybe we're all nutmegs in the end.
Thank you very much. Pauline, you just mentioned the role of the visual memory, and we were thinking about the role of the visceral memory so much. So for Lynn Margulis, biochemical processes of metabolization of organisms entering each other and changing each other's composition through contact and through ingestion. No? So I was wondering if you could speak a little bit about the metabolic notion relevant to the work. So there's more than entanglement, there's sort of mutually entering into.
Yeah, I think for sure you enter also in this piece in I think it's a very nice reference and framework to put it in. I think like on the one hand, we speak about food, so it's a lot about metabolism, but also like how, I mean, it's not an easy question you ask there, but I think how would you approach this, like to see, because it's the metabolic interpretation of this work is that it's a lot about food and the things that we eat that we take for granted, but also like how taste and food changes the way we perceive things. Maybe that's the way I would answer this. There's also, I think like we are connected as well to the seeds, as well to the different environmental and ecological elements around it. And I think we merge as much as with the ancestors of Zheng He, as with the descendants of Vasco da Gama and all these explorers. We are all connected to it in a way as species, as much as and we are also connected to the other animals. So I think that's also maybe what you could feel in this work, the interconnections between the past, present, and future species in this. And maybe it's a wedding in the end. It's a Mario status of maybe this is maybe the metabolic state of the work, if that answers it.
Yeah, beautifully, thank you. Beautifully put. It's so much about processes of becoming, of transformation, exactly. Not change, but transformation, where one organism, it becomes the part of the life of another.
Exactly.
Which is processes that are invisible, but absolutely fundamental to exist, and as a kind of shared existence, as a process in the flow.
Totally.
Thank you very much. The next position would be great to have Kobe Matis from Agency, and just to introduce Kobe or the installation in particular, it was really great that you sent me 2 days ago this quote from Lynn Margulis about the Pseudomonas bacteria being the weed of the bacterial world. And so I'm wondering if you could enfold your reading of Margulis into what you're going to tell us now, because I know that for you and for agency, the philosophies and scientific work of Margulis is absolutely formative. We've had many conversations about Margulis even before we started working on Quantum and Pons together. So I look forward to hearing from you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Kobi Matis. I'm part of an association called Agency, who has offices in Brussels. Agency mainly constitutes a list of boundary things, and with boundary things, we understand where there's hesitation between the classifications of nature and culture. And we've worked on many of these kind of controversies. They're mostly related to property issues as well, property in the real sense of like land and things like this, but also in the sense of mostly intellectual property. And the division between nature and culture is really like a colonial concept. I mean, there is the construction of nature at the same time as the construction of culture, in the sense that what is declared nature becomes kind of available for extraction and being transformed by the labor of the culture, so to say. And these issues are also at play in terms of intellectual property. I mean, maybe less the terra nullius concept in terms of the land, but there's something similar in authorship, which is called ex nihilo, that creation starts from the nothingness, which is one of the main doctrines of intellectual property in terms of authorship, and which is very strongly also affecting the ecologies of the artists and the arts more in general. So agency very much kind of researches how these legal concepts influences the ecologies of practices. So the case or the controversy we invoke within this context of this exhibition is around a pseudomonas, which is a bacteria that was genetically modified by a researcher in the US called Chakrabarti, and he used the DNAs of several of these bacteria in order to make a super bacteria that could be used to reduce oil spills on moments when there's disasters on the sea where a tanker loses a lot of oil, that these bacteria could be used to kind of dissolve the petroleum more faster. And it's maybe interesting to mention also Gomaya, which Gomaya is a very ancient practice in India, where actually there's a mixture of mud, I mean water and soil, but also cow dung, and it's used to clean adobe houses. It's like used ritually every morning. So, and this Gomaya actually contains a lot of these pseudomonas bacteria. So it's kind of interesting how this kind of common practice, which comes from a tradition and traditional knowledge, let's say it like this, becomes moved into an enclosure to the patenting of a bacteria through intellectual property, because this Chakrabarti, and he tried to obtain a patent for these gene-modified organisms, and it went to 10 years of legal discussions, but at the end the patent was granted, and it was a bit the whole beginning of the history of biotechnology and the patenting of life. And in the beginning, it seemed very innocent because a bacteria doesn't really look like a living organism, but later followed also patents on living organisms, going from mice and plants and so forth. So this case is from the 80s, and if you would like to know more about it, we will do an assembly around this controversy, where we revisit the moment of hesitation between the decision whether this belongs to nature or culture in an assembly on the 17th of April. So we'll invoke this case, like not to reenact the judgment, but more like to kind of dwell on the hesitation. Well, I think that's a brief introduction.
Great, thank you so
Maybe
much.
I could,
Please
maybe
go.
I could say a
ahead.
few things about Lynn Margulis.
That would be great.
What I find very interesting about Lynn Margulis is that her way of viewing the planet as a symbiogenesis also brings about this sympoiesis, you know, like and which is like, how can you understand the symbiosis and what's the motivation of it? And in a way, it's very much dealing with composition. And so the planet, not also as a natural being, which is which be a very mechanic point of view, as you know, of nature, you know, as a kind of a machine, but actually as a the sympoiesis is a kind of collaboration, but in the sense of a composition that is could be understood as something artistic, but then a kind of very collaborative artistic work, yeah, a real composition in the sense of a simple poiesis, or like the arts by non-humans or other than humans, including also our really ancestral beings, which are actually these bacterial microorganisms. I mean, that might sound very far-fetched, but that the world is like a kind of you know, composition that derived from, you know, the art of other than humans from a very ancestral time.
No, this is fantastic, and I think it may sound far-fetched only because we are patterned to not think of the coexistence of temporalities of ancient bacteria, contemporary property law, and the whole vast spans of worlds between them. But thank you, and I just want everyone who's watching to be aware you can also sign up on the website to participate and watch the assembly from agency. As well, if you're not so familiar with Lynn Margulis and this symbiotic and sympoetic composition that Kobe mentioned, the film by John Feldman documenting the life and legacy of Lynn Margulis is online as a virtual work throughout the duration of the exhibition, so you can sign up to see that. But I'm being told that we need to be a little more on time, so I quickly will pass the mic to Monica Lin, who has developed such an important work that breaks the wall or the membrane of the gallery and leads the exhibition into the watershed without which there could be no exhibition. So I pass it to Monica, if you would say a few words, perhaps about Zaanheh Project and this particular contribution.
Much. So Zaanheh Project is a collection of individuals that work here at NYU Shanghai. I work here at New York University, Shanghai. And they are made up of primarily professors who are interested in aspects of the tensions between the built and natural worlds. In particular, as pertains to indigenous species, hybridity, water as a means of transportation, as well as having its own kind of personality, if you will, and the history of how water has impacted and is being impacted by the individuals in Shanghai. So this is made up of historians, philosophers, urbanists, and then as well as myself as an artist. I'm really grateful to be able to have manifested the culmination of this project. And actually, it shouldn't say culmination because it's ongoing, but to have manifested one segment of the project. The project that I'm presenting takes its start from the dérive. For those of you not familiar with Guy Debord and his theory of the dérive, it essentially is a way of traveling through the urban sphere in a disrupted manner. So rather than through patterns or directions that are predetermined, it uses desire as a guide to both physically and metaphorically disrupt systems. Starting from there, a series of walks emerged, and I'm grateful to also my partner, David Perry, who is instrumental in these walks. The walks are based on an algorithmic, chance-based series of prompts. So the end destination is never known before we start. What has been surprising is that the destinations that I've been on have all ended at water. And that is possibly because Shanghai is such a watery city, but I think also I've been very fortunate. So the project here for ICA is essentially the development of a number of maps that visitors can take with them to experience some element of what I have investigated and what I've experienced. So the maps themselves are illustrations of the walks from the destination point onward. And they are accompanied by a set of prompts to activate the way that an individual might think about the space that they're in. And this is important to me primarily because of the way in which my motivation to investigate these sites has led to a series of both conversations with people as well as my own ruminations on the othering of nature. And Kobe, you had mentioned the cultivation of the idea of nature, the sort of curation of nature, and essentially the way that this is a product of colonization. And those are some of the ways in which I view what I encounter. As an example, I was fortunate enough to be able, through the Power Station of Art Museum here in Shanghai, take a number of individuals on some of these dérives. And we had 40 people show up, which was really wonderful. There were 3 of us with 3 different set of prompt maps, which were again activated through tossing a coin or some kind of numerical randomizer. And along the way, we would stop as we got to each sort of answer to a question, and discussed the way in which colonization, hybridity, migration, economics, capitalism have impacted the way that the built environment has developed, as well as what constitutes nature. So for those of you who are in Shanghai, please take maps, stop by the gallery, and those of you not, I'm happy to send you maps to at least take a look at.
Thank you, Monica. And if I could just say a thank you, a special shout out to Wolfgang Höckel, our designer, who worked with us on the layout and the curatorial assemblage, and the curtain, which we really wanted to make sure we didn't close you in, but we also wanted to make sure that we didn't close in any of the artworks or artist positions, because all of them call to, respond to, and invite a thinking with the outside. So we're really grateful that you could literally get us out there, but we also wanted to make sure that there was this insistence on an interaction, that the gallery is never a pond unto itself, but always in exchange through a threshold that is teeming with life, whether it is visible or not. And so with that, maybe I would just like to thank all of the guests who are actually in the gallery, who have been so patient with us. And it's nice to see you all again. We had the absolute pleasure of speaking with all of you as we were preparing and thinking about the exhibition. Those conversations were so resonant and stayed with our thinking. And so it's lovely to now be able to hear your thoughts about the exhibition, especially for all of us in Europe who will likely not see it. Please don't temper your enthusiasm in any way, because for us, you're really how we're going to feel the exhibition. So you can let your scientist objectivity go and just tell us how you feel about it. And I hand it back to you or to Michelle to get the view from inside the pond. Thanks.
Well, I guess I can start to comment a little bit. I was really amazed today coming here. It's an amazing example of different things about nature. We are not unmuted. You can't hear me. Oh, it's on the screen. On the screen. Okay. So you can hear me, right? Just okay, fine. Then let me continue. So what I want to say is, so I'm a scientist. I not normally go to galleries, and today I come here and I see like it's awesome. It's a nice combination of science and artwork. Especially this work from Maximilian, I really like it. It's a perfect example of how humans have influenced ecology, and now we actually have to deal with the consequences. So we really have to it's a really good example to show to the public that our actions have consequences, and we really need to rethink how we exploiting our planet, right? It needs to change somehow how we do this. Yeah, so this is what I wanted to say to that one. Another very interesting thing I found is the documentary from Mao Chenyu, which is like I never saw. So I'm a microbiologist, so I work with rice fields and the emissions of methane from that environment. So it's a very important source of a greenhouse gas. But I never looked at it as from a cultural perspective, right? So I never thought rice fields have some cultural element. So for me, it's just a source of methane. So I think when we start to rethink how to protect environments, for example, we also need to incorporate the cultural elements and combine this with new technologies or new ways of how to sustainably do agriculture, for example. So I find this is a very good good example of showing how an important ecosystem also has a cultural background. Okay, I think I let my colleagues also speak a little bit.
Thank you, Sasha.
It was just fascinating. I would say it's fantastic, and I'm glad here. And I would have more time to view the film made by Mao Chenyu, but due to the time limited, I would probably do it later. Because firstly, when Michel come to me, I feel a bit surprised because I am a zooarchaeologist. I couldn't see any connections with contemporary art. However, when we shared our discussion on November last year, I do find we have some common interest. Because I'm a zooarchaeologist, I believe most of you would not be that familiar with this subject. my job is to look at animal bones from archaeological sites, which means if I checking the morphology, that is the shape of the bones, I can tell you the species of the animal, the age of the animal, and probably the sex and the health condition. And so inferring from these informations, I then explore how human and animals were interacted in the past. I think that is the exact point bring us together, because we all want to understand how human was interacting with the whole world, whether it is in the past or in the present. That's why I really like this kind of crossover presentation of all different aspects of our life, whether we are scientists or whether you are artists, we all human. That's why we are here. We are discussing our whole life. We are discussing the whole world. So I'm really happy to be here. And last time I remember we talked about one of my projects in folk taxonomy in the past. I look at how ancient Chinese people classify animals in their world. And there was quite interesting, because when I did my research, I realized there were two perspectives in anthropology. One is ethic and the other one is emic. An ethic perspective means we should observing different kind of human groups as an outsider, so that we can achieve more accurate and objective data of them. But the other way, the emic perspective seeks the meaningfulness to the member of the human group, sort of from a standpoint of insiders. And I think especially this one, the assembly, is kind of provoke a emic perspective, because all of us are actually part of the assembly, part of the presentation. I really like the idea. Okay, thank you. So I really enjoyed the exhibition. Thank you, all of you. So let's pass on.
我觉得非常幸运能够，可以吗 ？OK， 好的，谢谢。我觉得非常幸运能够被这个展览和这个项目所邀请。当我今天我自己先介绍一下，我是一个植物考古学家archaeobotanist。我平时的工作是通过研究出土于考古遗址的植物遗存，来了解在过去人类和植物之间的关系。比如说非常典型的就有不同的农作物，它们是如何被人类驯化的。当然除了这样一个非常典型的一个人和动植物共生和植物共生的这样的一个这个方面以外，我们还有许多其他的，比如说人类和杂草之间的关系，人类和其他的这个更加晚近的栽培物种，以及这些物种它在传播和扩散当中的发生的许多这个我们说故事，这些是我的平时的工作会特别关注的这些方面。然后我觉得今天当我一走进这一个展厅的时候，我觉得完全是被我的脑子就是被这些影像的这些作品已经被点燃了，就是非常 fascinating 的这一种感觉。我想然后我特别的关注到了，特别的注意到了有3个作品，一个是关于这个授粉的作品，就是Max 的这个A Gift from Him 这个作品，还有一个是毛成宇先生的对湖南的这个稻作农业社会的不管是实验也好，还是他的一个从我的角度来看，它是一个很典型的民族学观察的这样的一个记录 ethnographic observation 哈。还有一个就是这个关于肉豆蔻的作品。然后这3个作品他们都是和就是主要是都是在描绘人类和植物之间的关系。
我觉得我特别希望，然后我看了这3个作品以后，特别希望我的学生，尤其是跟我学习的学生，他们都能够看到这3个作品。我们平时所接触到的材料，我们的 material 是静态的，就是我们会从考古遗址当中挖掘出来的，就是一个静态的物，它不会像我们自主的去告诉我们他们所经历过什么，但是我们的工作却是要从这些静态的物，把它背后的动态的过程去唤醒。我们要复原 reconstruct 它原来的这个语境当中，他们经历了一些什么，比如说人类是如何跟这些植物怎么样去利用这些植物的，如何跟这些植物去互动的，然后这些植物它在本身的它的这个人类生态系统，就是 human ecosystem 当中，它们跟其他物种之间的关系是怎么样的，然后这种多维的关系，它们又是如何互动的，这个是我的科学研究的工作，它的一个目标。而这些作品，我们今天看到的这些作品，人工的授粉，然后这个现代的水稻农业社会的这些农民，他们的日常生活和水稻和尤其还有跟他们的劳动紧密的交织在一起，它不是一种机械的交织，而且它是一种深度的结构性的交织，这些都丰富了，这些作品是艺术家带给我们的这个活生生的，丰富了我们对这个植物的认识，对植物的认识，他把这个植物学的包括这个肉豆蔻的这个作品，他们把我们的这个对植物的理解、对物的理解延伸到经济的、社会的、宗教的、信仰的、政治的、意识形态的这样一些触角，它让我们的这个对这些物的理解能够扩展得非常的深远。然后我还有特别想，刚才有一个感受，就是毛晨宇先生的这个作品和这个肉豆蔻和Pauline 的这个作品，他们恰好是一个，我觉得就像中国的画作当中的2种不同的风格。毛先生的这个作品，它是很细致的，而且是非常有人情味的去记录，这些农民他们的生活当中的非常切身的感受，1分1秒，它就像一个工笔绘画一样展示了很多细节。然后这个婚床的这个流散的这个作品，它就像是一个写意的这样的一个风格的东西一样，它把很多的符号，它把很多的意象集中到一起，然后它直接的一种视觉化的效果带给我们冲击，然后让我们能够去感受这个围绕着肉豆蔻这一种经济作物，它对我们人类的社会，它在人类的社会当中所搅起的浪花，非常感谢这一个展览，谢谢。
谢谢大家我刚开始的时候就从那个玄馆长那里得知到这个项目，然后也会见了一些在Ningning上会见了一些艺术家。我觉得刚开始我听到这个项目的时候，我就觉得非常的有意思，因为他从这个题目，从他的这个里面的一些展览的东西来看，跟我们生态学的东西非常的接近，让我觉得我去看这些东西的时候，我没有一种感觉是置身在外面的感觉，就像是我自己做的一些东西一样。就是我觉得科学和 science 和艺术之间真的是没有一个很明确的一个界限， 特别是当我看到像这个传粉的这个工作，我曾经在一个 Science 的杂志上面看到过那样的一个picture， 就是一张图，就是展示的就是中国西部的那个农民他在爬到树上去授粉的这样子的一张 picture。我曾经真的是在科学的杂志上就看过这样子一个图，这个也是我自己的研究里面，我曾经在森林里面去观察这个 pollinator 授粉的这个过程，还有植物开花的这个过程，这就是我自己的一个研究。还有这个植物，这个肉豆蔻的这个电影也是，我曾经也看过有一本书，就是我不知道英文是怎么样翻译，就是叫做《植物的欲望》，它里面也是讲过很多关于就是不同像土豆还有苹果，这个对人类社会到底有多大的影响？就人类为了追随这种甜味还有花卉这种东西，都对人类的这个社会都有非常大的影响。所以我觉得这些感觉看起来都非常亲切。还有包括这个毛晨宇先生的这个乡土的中国因为我自己也是从乡村出来的，我感觉真的也是非常的亲切。他的那些影像，我感觉好像就是在我曾经身边上接触过的那些人，就是那些物一样的。就是我是生长在湖北的一个农村，就是跟岳阳应该是很近的一个地方。就是感觉都是很近的一个情况，所以这个整体的这个展览让我感觉就是包括 Margulis 的那个纪录片也是给我带来很大的一个震撼，就是说在我们生态学里面，我们也是有这样子的一个，就是传统上从达尔文以来，我们更强调的是竞争，这个共生的这个观点，包括我自己也是在做这个。受到大家关注，认为这种关系在群落没有更好的一个手段去让普通的大众都能够去看到我们的这个研究的结果，但是艺术家可以能够更好的接触到大众，能够架起这座桥梁。就是我觉得未来应该我们有科学家和艺术家之间应该有更多的合作，这样子可能会改变我们现在的一个就是我们和自然分离的这样一个状况，或者说是我们对这个环境生态的这种consequence 的这种改变。这种应该是要一起去合作，去改变这样子的一个状况。好，谢谢大家。我能讲的就是这些。好。
Great, thank you all for your responses. It's hear from you both because of our earlier conversations, but also because you've actually seen the work, which is a very fortunate thing. So we received some questions in advance from.
I just had one thought that I wanted to respond to your wonderful feedback, and that is that with the Reassembling the Natural project, it's been very important for us from the very beginning to not start out from the disciplinary boundary notion of there's art and art does its thing and science is something completely different. For us, as you've all put so beautifully, the work that we try to do with these exhibitions is in fact to bring together different perspectives about the world and about how we comport ourselves as we live with and as part of nature. And so it's very beautiful to hear from you as you've visited the exhibition now that it stands, that in fact that's a successful process and that there's a sort of cross-pollination of inspiration that is possible to have a more profound, a more dense and more urgent conversation about these topics that really drive the reason for why we are doing the work of developing these exhibitions as collaborations between different perspectives, different experiences, different cultural practices, knowledges, and feelings. So thank you very much for your observations and feedback.
So we received some questions in advance, and I also assume people can put questions into the chat. And one of the questions that we received was about doing this all online. And I think I can say with some confidence that all of us here in Europe, in our pajama bottoms, would love to be there in the gallery with you guys. I could be quite certain that Kobe and Pauline and Duki and Maximilian and us would be so grateful to go on a tour with Monica and to visit with Lao. So I just want to be very clear for everyone that the ICA and Michelle and Iris and the whole team were an amazing collaborators to make this all happen over Zoom and email, and to realize such an absolutely incredibly professional execution of the whole thing. And so on behalf of all of us who aren't there, just a huge thank you for making this possible, and to this question of online curating. We really didn't want to do to just put everything as a virtual situation, because it's possible for you guys to visit the gallery in Shanghai. But just to say what a tremendous effort it has been. Of course, all of us would have loved to be there in person to participate in the installation, but as we couldn't be more grateful for the team at the ICA for making this possible. So yes, quiet applause. There is another question about the relationships between science and art and symbiosis, and I think that's been partially addressed. Of course, there are distinctions, and we do appreciate that Zhang Minhwa, when you do your observation of pollination, it is, of course, has a different set of requirements, perhaps, than Maximilian, because of what you're trying to map and understand. But both of those modes of attention allow us to understand different facets of that mutuality and that imbrication. I think one of the really exciting parts of being able to present this work together and to be able to develop a large publication that will come out of this is to really further develop the affinities, distinctions, and possible affordances of different ways of looking at the natural world, of undoing certain anthropocentric viewpoints, and to really try to understand how a new paradigm of symbiosis can offer different ways of thinking both art and science together. So I would open it up if there are any questions, if any of the artists or scientists or anyone who we can't see on the wings has any additional questions or concerns. I tried to read in the chat, but if any of you spot anything else that you want to respond to, I open it here.
Well, I would like to still make a comment, so I didn't have time in the beginning. So I feel like we both have the same goal here a little bit. So we as scientists, we try to understand the processes more from a technical aspect, right? And you guys as is it not working? It's working. Okay, closer. Okay. And you as artists, you try to visually present the issues that we are actually dealing with on a daily basis. So I think the key message here is that we need to start creating awareness of the problem, that we cannot just simply exploit our planet as we do, because it just causes too much trouble and we cannot really sustainably survive on this planet alone. So we need to somehow include the whole ecosystem, the whole system, in order to really understand and be able to actually survive on this planet.
Yeah, one of the things that you mentioned in our earlier interview about the question of methane and your study in the rice paddies, which I continue to kind of marvel at as something that, as you mentioned, we didn't even realize was an agent in this system, was the role of these methanotropes, which was so startling because while we're trying to understand the mutuality and codependence of the system, we're still also learning about really fundamental processes that keep our climate in some reliable form, which only a few decades ago we didn't even know were active or operative. Maybe you could just say a word about the fascinating world of methanotropes, because I think so many of us,
okay, I can.
As our experience, we didn't even know this was the case.
I can talk about it. I just thought like I would take up too much time for this, but it's really a fantastic topic to study. So basically what I'm doing is I'm looking at microorganisms that eating methane from the atmosphere and from the soil environment, and thereby mitigating methane emissions to the atmosphere. So this way it actually actively reducing the amount of methane in the atmosphere. And you must know that methane is one of the most important greenhouse gases that causes a lot of trouble. So in order to doing this, so it's a very, very important process to study this. But what we figured out recently is that you cannot look at those methanotropes that do this process alone. You actually need to look at them in the context of communities, because they interact with each other. And depending on the environmental conditions and depending on what elements are present, they could have very different functions. So for example, it turned out that if you study the methanotropes in isolation, they perform the process, let's say, good, right? But if you add diversity to it, like different species of other organisms, you can increase their performance. So those processes are we just start to begin that diversity really matters for the processes in the environment they perform, right? So I would just like to touch on another item, which is the diversity of microorganisms is so vast and we just don't know anything about it. If you think about only 0.1% of the diversity out there is cultured. So we can actually see what's going on with those organisms. All the other ones are just available as sequences. So there's a lot of potential out there, a lot of unknown interactions, a lot of unknown environments that we have no clue about what's actually going on there. And the point is they all interact. You cannot study them in isolation. We always need to observe them in the whole network, which makes it very hard for us as scientists, because how should we study processes that are so complex? So we somehow need to find ways to reassemble those communities in the laboratory, for example, controlling all those factors, and then really identifying what processes are they performing and how important are the interactions are.
No, I think it's such an important point that so much, although we're able to understand and present these particular touch points, whether this surrogacy of pollination, the diasporic botanies of desire from the nutmeg, the agency of the bacteria and its relation into the legal and property structure of capitalism, or the role of the peasant as an ecological agent, and a political agent simultaneously, but that the vast substrata of the living world is not only subvisible, but in a way also supra-intelligible, that it operates above our capacity to understand the extraordinary number of interactions which in their interactivity produce the stabilities that we depend on.
Yeah, I'd like to add one. Can I add one thing to it? Because I think one part, so we always talk about soil and environment, but we also can just look to ourselves. So I look to the body, like the skin microbiome it's called, is basically all the microbes that live on the skin are so diverse and are so important for us to stay healthy, to be protected from the environmental factors. This is just on the outside of the skin, right? Then you go inside of your body, you go to the intestines, which some microbiologists now consider as its own organ, because without all of those microbes, we're not able to survive. It's not possible. We need those microorganisms in order to break down all the food we eat, and all the chemicals that come in, and all the important factors that are associated to it. So I just want to say, we don't need to look into the soil, right? We can just look into the mirror. So we will see we'll see the importance of the nature right away.
That's exactly true. Max, I see you. I'll give you the word in a second. I just wanted to respond to what Sasha said in a kind of broader sense of the exhibition, because this is so important for the notion of ponds and non-ponds. Exactly, the understanding that the human agent in the world is not separate from ecological systems, that ecological systems are not at the outside, that climate change is not something that is happening beyond our stable bodies, that these processes are mutually intra and supra and info, that there's a constant folding process, and that's something that we have paid way too little attention to so far. And once we enter these kind of frameworks of layered existence, perhaps we can come to another way of confronting the situation that we do have to confront. So on that note, Max, you go.
Okay, I'm trying to explain my thoughts with my not so good English, but I will do my best. I think when it comes to diversity, and this is something that I really experienced in this area with very less insects, is that, or I want to make another example that I've heard about the last years, is the collective estimation intelligence. So for example, if you have a jam with mumbles or like small pieces, and you ask a lot of different people to estimate the correct number of the mumbles inside of the jam. So in the average, altogether, they are more close to the real number of the mumbles in the glass than a single person. So, and this is I think a very philosophical aspect of diversity that shows that culture itself is a very high technology of human species to deal with problems and find a solution together, and shows that a single individual is not able to find truth. It's only possible to find something like we call truth together. So, and it's the same in the ecological thing, or in the scientific thing, and how we interact together. So I'm very happy to collaborate with you, and very happy to be part in this exhibition, who is very international and interactive.
Thank you. Anyone else? Because I know we're running toward the end of time. I'm not sure if the magic Zoom room disappears at any time, but I did want to ask, because so much of this conversation was guided into this moment from the framework that Michelle set up with the Invisible Garden. And I would be very curious to know from Michelle if Pawns Among Pawns landed in the right place as the sort of finale of the Invisible Garden. I can't see her in the frame, but I imagine she's there, to just say a few words about how the ICA and the Invisible Garden has opened up this set of questions, and to hear from Michelle, because she's been such an amazing collaborator.
Okay, thank you for putting me on the spot.
Anytime.
Well, I'm really, again, I just have to say again how amazing it is and how strange this situation is to have the artists outside of the gallery, the curators in another country, and the scientists here with us here. But it's not strange, it's actually something that, you know, is almost the best scenario we can hope for at times, is really to create these kinds of spaces for strange encounters or seemingly strange encounters. So I think with bringing Pawns Among Pawns to this artistic research program, the Invisible Garden, the hinge, sorry, I'm out of frame. The hinge for me really was about this method or tool of display when it comes to, you know, natural history or nature, and the ways in which we organize knowledge in those collections or in the sciences or even in the arts, and the ways in which we display nature really play a key role in how we come to understand and define our relationship with it. So it really felt like a, forgive me for the poor use of words, but natural fit to invite, you know, Reassembling the Natural and this project of looking at, again, about this question of display when it comes to a natural history and the cleavage it creates when you think about natural history as a separate discipline from that of the social or the political or the cultural, that these things are really intertwined. Yes, did that answer your question? I think I just kind of tried to explain why the fit was good for all of us here.
But I'm just, if you could just say a bit for folks to understand who maybe didn't see the previous iterations of the Invisible Garden. To us, this was such a provocation because the garden here in Europe under lockdown has become the sanctuary garden and the mentally stable place where we can somehow manage to not go mad while we wait for the European Union to sort itself out. And so but the Invisible Garden was really such a attractor for these ideas and helped us to clarify so much about the importance of Lynn Margulis, and also help us think through and find the artists we're so grateful to work with. But if you could just say maybe a little bit for folks who are like, well, what is this Invisible Garden?
Oh, sure. Well, I mean, there wasn't like a set thesis, right? Where all of these seasons and projects and individuals would then like prove the thesis or something. It really has been a process, and it's been a pleasure actually to see these affinities emerge with each season. So with Pawns Among Pawns, much of the sort of fundamental or underlying idea is this illusion of the biological individual, that there is this, everything is sort of coextensive, whether you're talking about narratives of history or, you know, organisms or the makeup of organisms and cells. And so that to me resonated quite well with Candice Lynn and Patrick Staff season last fall, sorry, I'm trying to compress time in my head. Last fall, which also had a very similar sort of ethos with their work and sort of thinking through the illusion that the individual presents in something like how vulnerable we might be. So that project involved a series of fog machines that were essentially hacked to release an herbal tincture of a mixture of plants that would sort of make irregular one's hormone levels, and therefore the sort of categories of being or identity as male and female based on testosterone and estrogen. And then prior to that, well, we had our spring season prior to that canceled because of COVID. And then we opened this Invisible Garden series really with this notion of trying to meet the other, let's say, the plant or the non-human on their own terms. And so with an artist like Zheng Bo, you know, the work that really attracted us at first to bring them into this artistic research program was this series of videos in which he engaged with a community of queer young men in Taiwan who were experimenting sexually with plants, particularly ferns in the forest. And so it was this, you know, so I didn't really set out to, sort of support a thesis behind the invisible card. And I guess with this season, these sort of affinities and similarities and contrasts kind of emerged with each artist, with each season, with each contributor and participant who contributed. And hopefully it'll amount to some kind of coherent thesis. But, if it doesn't, then it was just a great process to go through over these last 2 years.
Yeah, thank you so much for mentioning it, because it's, I think whenever, the same with us across Reassembling the Natural, in each iteration, there were things we really never could have imagined. The thesis that the natural in our image of nature is both a construct of our social and political scenario and a reality against which we don't have control, and trying to balance the tension between an image of nature which is inherited from a colonial and Eurocentric imaginary, and at the same time a nature which is teeming with processes and interactions and trajectories of its own that are largely indifferent to the vanity of human activity. I think is something that we've really tried to manage across the project, but in Ponds Among Ponds, it does seem to have reached a kind of coherence, both in terms of the ways in which we try to impose, the ways in which we try to repair, the ways in which we try to explore, and the inheritances with which we try to navigate this current situation. So it's been a tremendous pleasure to have this opportunity to think with all of you, to think with Michelle and your team, and to really try to offer to the visitors some memorable ways of rethinking the illusion of their biological individuality, as you say, Michelle. So thank you all.
No, yeah, thank you to Etienne and Sophie for joining us on this very unique setup, we'll say. None of us are quite still used to these experimentations in Zoom or remote curating and remote research and organizing. So thank you for being game for all of it, and to all the artists as well, Max, Monica, Mao Laoshi, agencies Kobe Mathis, as well as Pauline and Dookie, who seem to have left the Zoom, but we're so grateful to all of you, as well as our scientists here, Sasha Krauss, Zhang Minhwa, Pan Yan, and Dong Ning, really, this was a kind of a leap for all of us, I think, to jump into this, you know, unknown and making and organizing. But we're really just so grateful to all of you for taking that leap with us and experimenting with us on this type of event and project making. So thank you.
And before we go, for any of you folks who are tuned in on the call here, please do, there are more of these experiments to come, and Kobe will be leading agency through some assemblies into the unknown virtual territory again, and as well as the premiere of Mao Laoxi's new film. So please do check out the site and sign yourself up for those so that you can follow the rest of the program. We're again totally indebted to everyone at the ICA for making this mixed reality, which we now can call normal, so smooth and so thoughtful. And also a very special thank you to the translators for enabling this conversation in the first place. I want to acknowledge that work and its importance in maintaining these conversations. So thank you.
Yes,
everyone.
I want to say thank you to Athena and Yin for their amazing and deft translation all afternoon and evening. And I also want to make a brief mention to our team here who really worked very hard to put this blended situation together with the gallery and the sound and the video. So I have to thank Iris Ju, our curatorial assistant, Chen Indi, Qin Xiaoyan, and of course, again, I just want to thank again the scientists and the artists and the curators for joining us today. Thank you so much. And thank you to the audience who remains at this point. And we're so grateful and hope that you'll join us again. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.